They handed me a shovel and pointed toward the back of the herd. "Congratulations, rookie," Jake Morrison sneered, tobacco juice staining his yellowed teeth. "You get drag duty. Hope you don't mind eating dust and cleaning up cow pies for the next 3 weeks." The other ranch hands erupted in laughter. Even the cook, a grizzled man named Shorty, chuckled from behind his chuck wagon. I stood there, 22 years old, fresh off the bus from Dallas, holding that shovel like it was a death sentence. "Problem with that, city boy?" Morrison asked, his weathered face twisted into a cruel grin. I looked at the massive herd stretching before us. 3,000 head of prime Angus cattle, worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas plains, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its lonely song. "No problem at all," I said quietly, adjusting my new hat. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last 2 years studying every aspect of this ranch. I knew their profit margins, their debt structure, their seasonal cash flows. I knew old man Henderson was 3 months behind on his loan payments and that the bank was getting nervous. I knew because my trust fund had quietly purchased those loans 6 months ago. But for now, I was just the city kid with the shovel, following behind the herd, cleaning up their mess, let them think what they wanted. Sometimes the best revenge is served at exactly the right temperature, ice cold. The first day nearly broke me. Dust coated every inch of my body, turning my sweat into muddy streams that carved channels down my face. The acrid smell of cattle waste burned my nostrils, and my back screamed from constant bending. Every time I thought I'd caught up, another cow would leave me a fresh present to clean. "How's that college education working out for you now?" Morrison called back, his horse dancing sideways as he laughed. I didn't answer, couldn't answer. My throat was too dry, my pride too bruised. The other hands, Tommy, Carlos, and Big Jim, rode point and flank, the prestigious positions where real cowboys worked. They controlled the herd's direction, made the important decisions, earned the respect. I followed behind with my shovel and a wheelbarrow, invisible except when they needed entertainment. By noon, my hands were raw and bleeding despite the work gloves. Shorty took pity on me during the lunch break, sliding an extra biscuit onto my plate when Morrison wasn't looking. "Don't let 'em get to you, son," he whispered. "Every man's got to start somewhere." If only he knew where I was planning to finish. That afternoon, as I scraped dried manure off my boots, I pulled out my satellite phone, hidden in my saddlebags where no one would see it. A quick call to my financial advisor confirmed what I already knew. Henderson's next loan payment was due in 18 days. The ranch was hemorrhaging money, and this cattle drive was their last desperate attempt to raise cash. I smiled, pocketing the phone. Patience, I reminded myself. Good things come to those who wait. By the third day, I'd learned the unspoken hierarchy of the cattle drive. Morrison was the trail boss, a position he'd held for 15 years and wore like a crown. He made every major decision, from where we'd water the cattle to which route we'd take around obstacles. His word was law, and he never let anyone forget it. Tommy and Carlos rode point, guiding the lead cattle and setting the pace. They were Morrison's favorites, young, cocky, and quick to laugh at his jokes. Big Jim rode flank, a quiet man with gentle hands, who seemed to understand cattle better than people. Then there was me, eating their dust and cleaning their messes. "You know what your problem is, college boy," Morrison said during our evening meal, beans and hardtack around a crackling fire. "You think you're better than this work, think you're too good to get your hands dirty." The irony wasn't lost on me. My hands were filthier than anyone's, caked with dirt and worse things. But I kept my mouth shut and let him talk. "Real cowboys don't complain," he continued, warming to his theme. "They do what needs doing without whining about it. Maybe if you prove yourself back there with that shovel, we might let you ride drag next drive. Might." The others nodded sagely, as if Morrison was dispensing ancient wisdom instead of petty cruelty. I stared into the fire, watching the flames dance against the star-filled sky. In 2 weeks, when this drive was over and the cattle were sold, Henderson would get his money, but it wouldn't be enough to save the ranch. Not even close. And then the real education would begin. The fourth morning brought rain, a cold, driving downpour that turned the trail into a muddy nightmare. The cattle bunched up, reluctant to move, and everyone's temper grew short. "Get those stragglers moving!" Morrison shouted over the wind, water streaming from his hat brim. I was soaked within minutes, my clothes clinging to my skin like a second miserable hide. The wheelbarrow became useless in the mud, so I had to carry everything by hand. My boots squelched with every step, and I slipped twice, landing face first in the muck. But something strange happened as the day wore on. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started paying attention, really paying attention. I noticed how the cattle moved in patterns, how certain cows always led while others followed. I saw which animals were favoring a leg or showing signs of illness. I learned to read the weather in the way they held their heads and the direction they faced when resting. Most importantly, I watched Morrison make mistakes. He pushed too hard when the cattle were spooked, creating a near stampede that Big Jim had to defuse with quick thinking. He chose a bad campsite that left us exposed to the wind. He rationed water poorly, leaving the herd thirsty when we reached a dry creek bed. 20 years I've been doing this, he bragged that night, oblivious to his errors. I nodded respectfully while mentally cataloguing every mistake. Knowledge is power, and I was accumulating both with every miserable mile. The rain stopped near midnight, leaving the air clean and sharp. Stars emerged between breaking clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. I lay in my soggy bedroll, calculating interest rates and payment schedules, planning my next move in a game Morrison didn't even know he was playing. On the 6th day, everything changed. We were crossing Willow Creek when Big Jim's horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down hard. Jim hit the ground with a sickening thud and didn't get up. His leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Broken," Morrison said grimly, kneeling beside the injured cowboy. "Bad break. We need to get him to town." That left us 3 men short-handed with a herd that was already getting restless. The cattle could sense something was wrong. They always could, and they were starting to scatter. "Tommy, you and Carlos hold the point," Morrison ordered. "I'll ride flank, college boy." He looked at me with obvious reluctance. "Think you can handle drag without that shovel for a while?" This was it, my chance to prove I was more than just the cleanup crew. I swung into my saddle, a borrowed horse named Dusty, who'd been relegated to pack duty, and rode toward the back of the herd. The cattle were milling around, confused and agitated. A few had already started wandering off toward a stand of cottonwoods. Instead of charging after them like Morrison would have done, I sat quietly and watched. Cattle are herd animals. They want to stay together. The trick is convincing them that staying together means going where you want them to go. I identified the natural leader among the stragglers, a big red cow with a white face, and gently pressured her back toward the main group. The others followed, just like I knew they would. "Not bad, rookie," Morrison called out, surprise evident in his voice. I touched my hat brim in acknowledgement, but inside I was grinning. This was just the beginning. Word of my performance at Willow Creek spread through the crew that evening. For the first time since the drive began, the other hands looked at me with something approaching respect instead of amusement. "Where'd you learn to read cattle like that?" Carlos asked, genuinely curious. "Books," I said simply, which wasn't entirely a lie. I'd spent months studying animal behavior, ranch management, and livestock psychology. But I'd also grown up on my grandfather's small farm in East Texas, back before the oil money changed everything. Morrison was less impressed. "Don't let it go to your head, college boy. One good day doesn't make you a cowboy." But over the next few days, I proved it wasn't just luck. When a group of yearlings tried to break away during a thunderstorm, I was there to turn them back. When we hit a narrow passage between two hills, I positioned myself perfectly to prevent bottlenecking. When an old bull got ornery and started challenging the other cattle, I knew exactly how to isolate him without spooking the herd. Morrison watched me with growing suspicion, like he couldn't quite figure out what game I was playing. The truth was, I wasn't playing a game at all. I was learning to run a cattle operation from the ground up, starting with the most basic and essential skill, understanding the animals themselves. "You're full of surprises," Shorty said one evening as I helped him clean the cooking pots. "Most city boys would have quit by now." I scrubbed a stubborn spot of beans from the cast iron. "I'm not most city boys," he chuckled. "No, I reckon you're not. Question is, what exactly are you?" That was a question I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. The storm hit on the 10th night with the fury of an angry god. Lightning split the sky in jagged white scars, while thunder rolled across the plains like cannon fire. The cattle, already nervous from the day's heat, began to panic. 3,000 animals moving in terror is a force of nature that can crush a man without even noticing. "Stampede!" Morrison shouted over the wind. This was every cowboy's nightmare, the moment when everything could go wrong in seconds. Cattle in full stampede could run for miles, scattering across the countryside, trampling anything in their path. Fortunes could be lost in minutes. But as I watched the herd begin to surge forward, something clicked in my mind. All those days of observation, all those hours studying their behavior patterns, suddenly crystallized into understanding. I spurred Dusty forward, not toward the front of the herd, where Morrison and the others were trying to turn the leaders, but toward a specific group of middle-aged cows I'd been watching for days. These were the real decision-makers, the ones the younger cattle looked to for guidance. The rain lashed my face as I rode parallel to the herd, not fighting their momentum, but working with it. Instead of trying to stop them, I began to curve their path, gradually bending their direction away from the dangerous ravine ahead and toward the open grassland where they could run safely until they exhausted themselves. It was a risky move. If I miscalculated, I'd be caught in the middle of the stampede with nowhere to go. But sometimes you have to risk everything to save everything. The technique worked. Slowly, gradually, the herd began to curve away from disaster. When the storm finally passed and the cattle settled, Morrison stared at me with something approaching awe. "How did you know to do that?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked out at the herd, now calm and grazing peacefully under the emerging stars. Tomorrow, we'd reach the railhead. Tomorrow, everything would change. "Lucky guess," I said finally, but we both knew it was much more than that. The town of Sweetwater appeared on the horizon like a mirage. Dusty buildings shimmering in the heat, the railroad tracks gleaming silver in the afternoon sun. After 11 days on the trail, it looked like paradise. The cattle buyers were waiting at the stockyards, clipboards in hand and calculators ready. These were hard men who made their living squeezing every penny from desperate ranchers, and they could smell Henderson's desperation from miles away. "Best I can do is $42 a head," the lead buyer announced after inspecting the herd. "Take it or leave it." Morrison's face went white. I'd done the math. At that price, Henderson would barely cover his expenses, let alone make the loan payment that was due in 7 days. "Now hold on," Morrison protested. "These are prime cattle. Look at the condition they're in after 11 days on the trail. Not a one of them lost weight." The buyer shrugged. "Market's soft. 42 is generous." I watched the negotiation from the sidelines, my heart pounding. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when Henderson's carefully constructed house of cards would finally collapse. But something unexpected happened. As I looked at Morrison's desperate face, at Shorty's worried expression, at the other hands who depended on this ranch for their livelihood, I felt something I hadn't anticipated. Guilt. These weren't just numbers on a balance sheet. These were real people whose lives would be destroyed when the bank foreclosed. Men who'd worked this land for decades, who'd trusted Henderson to take care of them. 45, I heard myself saying. Everyone turned to stare at me. The buyer laughed. You buying cattle now, shovel boy? I pulled out my satellite phone and made a call. This is James Morrison Henderson III, I said quietly. I need you to wire $200,000 to the Sweetwater Cattlemen's Bank. Yes, immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Henderson, Morrison whispered, his face pale as prairie snow. Your old man Henderson's grandson? I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of 11 days of deception. Great-grandson, actually. My grandfather was James Morrison Henderson I. He founded this ranch in 1923. The cattle buyer was already on his phone, checking my credentials. Within minutes, he was back with a very different attitude. Mr. Henderson, sir, perhaps we can discuss a more appropriate price for your cattle. But I wasn't done. 45 per head, as I said, and I'll be buying them myself. Morrison looked like he'd been kicked by a horse. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us who you were? Why put yourself through all this? I looked out at the cattle, our cattle, peacefully waiting in the holding pens, because I needed to learn the business from the ground up. My great-grandfather built this ranch with his bare hands, but somewhere along the way, we lost touch with what that really meant. I needed to understand what it takes to move cattle, to read the weather, to make the hard decisions. So this was all some kind of test? Carlos asked, anger creeping into his voice. No, I said firmly. This was education, and you were my teachers, whether you knew it or not. I turned to Morrison, who was still staring at me in shock. You taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice or the most intimidating presence. It's about making the right decisions under pressure. You made mistakes, but you also kept us safe and got the cattle through. Shorty chuckled and shook his head. Well, I'll be damned. No wonder you never complained about the food. The tension broke, and even Morrison cracked a smile. So, what happens now, boss? The word boss hung in the air between us. It was a title I'd inherited but never earned until now. The next morning I called a meeting in the hotel's small conference room. The entire crew was there, along with Henderson, my great-uncle actually, who'd driven down from the ranch when he heard the news. First things first, I said, standing at the head of the table. Nobody's losing their job. The ranch is financially stable now, and we're going to keep it that way. Relief flooded their faces. Henderson, a weathered man in his 70s, looked like he might cry. Second, we're making some changes. Morrison, I'm promoting you to ranch foreman. You know this operation better than anyone, and I need your experience. Morrison straightened in his chair, pride replacing the confusion in his eyes. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't. And drop the sir. We're partners now. I turned to the others. Carlos, Tommy, you're both getting raises and more responsibility. Shorty, I want you to train a couple of the younger hands in cooking and camp management. What about you? Henderson asked. You planning to stay on? I'd been thinking about that question for days. I am, but not in the big house. I want to build a small cabin near the bunkhouse. I've got a lot more to learn, and I can't do that from behind a desk. You sure about that? Morrison asked. Running a ranch is more than just moving cattle. I know. That's why I'm going to spend the next year learning every aspect of the operation. Breeding, feeding, veterinary care, equipment maintenance, financial management, all of it. Henderson smiled for the first time since I'd known him. Your great-grandfather would be proud. He always said the best ranchers were the ones who weren't afraid to get their boots dirty. I thought about the shovel I'd carried for 11 days, about the dust and sweat and humiliation. It had been the best education money couldn't buy. Speaking of boots, I said, I need to buy some new ones. These city boots aren't going to cut it. Everyone laughed, and for the first time since this whole adventure began, I felt like I truly belonged. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my new cabin, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin was small but comfortable. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a view of the pastures where our cattle grazed peacefully. The ranch was thriving. We'd implemented new breeding programs, upgraded our equipment, and established direct relationships with premium beef buyers who paid top dollar for our grass-fed cattle. The loan was paid off, and we were actually showing a healthy profit for the first time in years. But the real changes went deeper than financial statements. Morrison had blossomed in his role as foreman, his natural leadership skills finally given room to grow. He'd stopped being defensive and started being collaborative, working with me to plan improvements and solve problems. Carlos and Tommy had both enrolled in agricultural extension courses, eager to learn modern ranching techniques. Shorty had indeed trained 2 young hands in camp cooking, and his evening meals had become legendary throughout the county. Even the cattle seemed different, calmer, healthier, more responsive to handling. It turns out that when the people caring for them are happy and motivated, animals sense it. "Morning, boss," Morrison called out, riding up on his favorite horse, a paint mare named Patches. "Morning, Jake. How are the new calves looking?" "Strong and healthy. That new bull we bought is proving his worth." He dismounted and joined me on the porch. "You know, I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For how I treated you on that drive. I was being a jackass." I chuckled. "You were protecting your territory. I understand that now. Besides, if you hadn't given me the worst job on the drive, I never would have learned what I needed to know." He grinned. "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" A year after that first cattle drive, we were preparing for another one. But this time, everything was different. The herd was larger, 4,000 head of the finest cattle in Texas. The crew was bigger too, with several new hands who'd heard about our operation and wanted to be part of something special. I stood in the same spot where Morrison had handed me that shovel 12 months earlier, but now I was holding reins instead. My horse was a young gelding named Courage, and he was eager to get moving. "Ready for this?" Morrison asked, riding up beside me. I looked out at the massive herd, at the crew of dedicated cowboys who'd become like family, at the endless sky that promised adventure and challenge in equal measure. "More than ready," I said. This time, I wouldn't be riding drag or carrying a shovel. I'd earned my place at the front of the herd, helping to guide these magnificent animals across the same trails my great-grandfather had ridden nearly a century ago. But I'd also learned something important. Every position on a cattle drive matters. The man riding point sets the direction, but the man riding drag keeps everyone together. Leadership isn't about being in front. It's about making sure nobody gets left behind. "Move 'em out," I called, and the great herd began to flow across the prairie like a river of living beef. As we rode, I thought about that first terrible, wonderful day when I'd been given the worst job on the cattle drive. It had seemed like punishment then, but now I understood it for what it really was, the beginning of everything. Sometimes the worst job turns out to be the best education. Sometimes you have to start at the bottom to truly understand what it means to be at the top. And sometimes the longest trail leads exactly where you need to be. 5 years have passed since that first cattle drive, and as I write this, I'm sitting in the same cabin I built, watching my own son take his first steps in the yard outside. His mother, Sarah, a veterinarian I met at a cattle auction, is teaching him to be gentle with the barn cats. The ranch has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We now run 8,000 head across 50,000 acres, and our beef is served in some of the finest restaurants in the country. But more importantly, we've created something that will last, a community of people who care about the land, the animals, and each other. Morrison retired last year, though he still comes around to offer advice and tell stories to the younger hands. Carlos runs the breeding program now, and Tommy manages our direct sales operation. Shorty passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 winters ago, but his recipes live on in the chuck wagon. The shovel I carried on that first drive hangs on my cabin wall now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that every job has dignity, that every person has value, and that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. My son will grow up on this ranch, and someday he'll face his own tests and challenges. When that time comes, I hope I'll have the wisdom to let him find his own way, to make his own mistakes, and to discover his own strength. Because that's what my great-grandfather would have wanted. That's what the land demands. And that's what real leadership looks like. Not commanding from above, but serving from within, building something bigger than yourself that will outlast your own brief time on this earth. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove ourselves worthy of this legacy. But tonight, I'm content to sit here with my family, listening to the cattle settle for the evening and the coyotes begin their ancient song. Sometimes the worst job really does lead to the best life.